Last week we caught up with Emelda Davis just before the Wantok Forum for Australian South Sea Islanders started in Mackay. Now, the forum aimed to move one step closer to establishing establishing a national representative body that could present united voice and advocate on behalf of the islanders at the Australian government level. Emelda Davis is president of the Interim Association of Australian South Sea Islanders, and she joins us today to tell us how things even go there. Welcome, Emelda, and thanks again for joining me.
Hi, how are you going, Jenny?
Good, thank you. Now, did you get as many people attending the forum as you'd hoped for?
Look, on day one, what happened on day one, it was a packed house, and there would have been easily 200 people. Over the course of the next few days, given that majority of the community in Mackay, ASSI mob, are very staunch Seventh-day Adventists and religious considerations. So on the Saturday, it was a bit lax. So we had, I would have said, around about 60 participants on the Saturday. And then on the Sunday, we got a bit more because those Seventh-day Adventists participated. And then on the Monday, it was more of the same because it was a working day. So basically, the model, previous model that was adopted on Wantok 2013 was dissolved on day one. So the following days were about working together through how we're going to take the vision forward and setting up a National Governance Working Group, which was apparent and overwhelming or unanimous vote that we move forward with a National Governance Working Group to develop a constitution and for a national body representation. Now, a federation hybrid model was put on the agenda for discussion, and there were discussions surrounding that, as well as an elders register and a few other things that are going to feed into this national governance. This national governance group for further development in presenting in 6 months' time national body representation.
Now, I know you explained these issues last time, but for listeners today who missed that interview, can you briefly explain again why there is a need for Australian South Sea Islanders to join together with the United National Voice?
Simply because Australian South Sea Islanders are disadvantaged significantly, as our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities are. We lack in support with meaningful programs and services to assist us in education, economical development, health, all of those areas that are critical to survival in today's society. And since 1994, the Commonwealth recognition, there has not been any true national follow-through in that commitment to support Australian South Sea Islanders with the developments in these areas. So since the 150th anniversary, since Kanakas were brought to Australia through indentured labour in slave-like conditions, 2013 has seen 2012 has seen a real push for a national body representation, simply because the government cannot speak to an individual organisation. I mean, they can to a certain degree, but at the same time they need a united voice in order to advocate for the needs of a national community. So the estimated 40 to 50,000 that exist today who are descendants of the blackbird trade, and that trade commenced as early as 1847, but a true influx was through the labour trade was 1863 to 1908, and we are descendants of those blackbirded. So we need to assess the demographic. That's a real key issue here. In order to win over the commitment or further, build our foundation and commitment from the Commonwealth and state agencies in support of future developments for our youth, I guess, and elders.
One challenge being tackled at last week's forum was the task of finding an agreed name or term to describe all Australian South Sea Islanders. Why was that issue raised, and was a concern, was the decision reached at that forum?
There was no solid decision reached at the forum because the National Governance Working Group will take some of this information out as a part of our community education. So appointed to the National Governance Working Group was 7 participants, and it's chaired by Greg Sutherland, who's a South Sea Islander from Mackay, and he runs Marabista. And now what he will do is then take further information out as a part of consultations, but a general consensus around, how do we identify as a part of the ABS? Should that be possible in the next census or thereafter? And there was a lot of discussion about, what that term would be. So discussions for now, because of the nature of the participation in the Wantok Forum, it's really important that we get out to as many community groups as possible. Now, this National Governance Working Group is committed to really getting out throughout all those northern regions and remote areas, as well as New South Wales, and looking at trying to touch base with those other contacts in states and territories that exist. But the general consensus is Australian South Sea Islander for the terminology to be used. But what does that look like as it sits in the census is going to be shared through more communication with the Australian Bureau of Statistics to discuss how that will spit out the information if that particular word is used, and what does it relate to. So how do we identify what an Australian South Sea Islander is and what the terminology will be to describe that. I mean, it's pretty straightforward for some of us, but then when you're looking at these census forms and the complications behind them in how they spit out demographic information, we have to take into consideration some of that information that will trigger, the right response, because we don't want to take away from our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community demographic. It's included, but it needs to be very clear that this is what it is, although it's independent, if that makes sense.
The other major task for the forum was setting the foundations on which a national representative body could be established. What progress was made there?
Sorry?
The other major task for the forum was setting the foundations on which a national representative body could be established. Could you tell us what progress was made there?
The progress was that, which is really phenomenal, that the Mackay community organisations have come together in solidarity for the first time. There was the state body meeting on the Saturday, which coincided with the Wantok Forum, which was groundbreaking, and that saw a lot of those individual groups from different regions, Rocky Townsville, etc., come together to discuss state body representation and supporting the national body developments. So the progress in that sense is that community cohesion has occurred for the first time in at least a decade. Especially for far north Queensland. And some of those decisions in terms of having a working group gives a strong focus to constitutional development. So we had a lot of feedback about what a constitution looks like, what that membership's going to look like, and just how people saw their commitment and participation in this model, and looking at the outcome, which would be the final elections, which would possibly be in 6 months' time, and registration of that national body. So it was a huge weekend. It was an exhausting weekend, but those that were committed to the national body developments sat in on that, and then they crossed over between the state and vice versa, and then they had different people with messages coming from the state body representation to speak to the national body. So, and New South Wales was well represented as well, from a lot of the Tweed mob in Sydney. So that was a real clue. I mean, the community cohesion's happening, and it's about creating a greater understanding. We had Gilbert and Tobin Law Firm come in on day one to speak to, and they're a national law firm that have done a lot of work in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and are committed to good governance support and practices with our communities. So they came in, Darr and Fittler, and spoke to South Sea community about good governance practices. What does conflict of interest look like? Funding possibilities and how that works, because there's a lot of different perceptions when you've got movements happening so quickly as we have done over the last 3 years in reviving the core. There's a lot of stuff that comes back from community because of the lack of understanding. So we hope that Gilbert and Tobin gave a true, independent and accurate, perspective on governance and conflict of interest and what that looks like for our community groups as we develop. So that was a real positive. We had Tony Wadigo hosting a facilitation on an elders register and just what would that look like and what defines an elder for Australian South Sea Island mob. So that was a very strong workshop as well, because that really needs to be a consideration first and foremost as a part of our national body developments and how we draw on that knowledge. But yeah, it was a great conference. It was a fantastic outcome.
Do you see any challenges ahead now for the next 12 months?
The challenges are to encourage community to participate. Once Greg Sutherland, who is the chair of this national working group. So may I just make it clear here, the National Secretariat and the previous board that was nominated in Brisbane has been dissolved. We have reverted back to basics with a National Governance Working Group. I am one of those participants on that governance working group, and Greg Sutherland from Mackay is now managing as the chair and administration arm to that group. So it's his responsibility to identify the communities with the group and take this constitutional development out to those community groups that don't necessarily have access or could participate as a part of the Wantok platform. And then we'll deliver another Wantok in 6 months' time, which will be fantastic. But it's critical that we try to encourage as many people to have their say as a part of this development, because this model is for the people, and we are dedicated to a grassroots perspective. It's a bottom-up take on how we're going to deal with all of this, and the government are just waiting to see still, but we've progressed significantly and we've made we've broken some good ground, and Torres Strait is a big consideration there, and we've yet to have discussions. It's early days in this week, and we're just moving with deliberation and making sure we don't sort of tread on people's toes and do things in a respectful manner.
Yes, so for that, now Emelda, if there are families here in the Torres Strait wanting to contact you for whatever it might be, what's the best way they can do that?
More than happy for them to contact myself directly on my email, A for Apple, S for Sam, S for Sam, I.pj@gmail.com. So it's ASSI.pj@gmail.com, and I'm happy to facilitate any of that information through to the National Working Group. And at some point we'll be doing a media release to announce the new contact details for Greg Sutherland and the team, and identify all of those leaders that are working on this group with us for future developments. And people are welcome to speak to anyone on that board, I guess. It's not a board, it's a working group. So, welcoming any suggestions or conversation.
No worries. Well, Emelda, thank you very much for giving us that feedback and update this morning, and we'd love to be in contact with you, and so you can keep that information flowing to families in the Torres Strait here. Thank you again for your time.
And thank you again. Big SO.